I'm Tharanki Ramaturakan, and this is the fall of the empire. It's a true story that I wrote in my book called, I don't know, maybe you can read backwards. Can you read backwards? My book called Wild and Free on the Lower East Side. 9 true stories from the 70s and 80s in New York City. Now, this story, the action in the story took place about 1979, 1980. The story was written in, when did I write this? 2004. The fall of the empire. Now, the story has an opening picture and 2 quotes. The picture is of an apple with a flame coming out of it and the letters SOS pointing to the flame. And the caption over the apple says, "American as apple pie." The opening quotes are by Lawrence Peter and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Lawrence Peter said, "America is a country that doesn't know where it's going, but is determined to set a speed record getting there." And Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "The end of the human race will be that it will eventually die of civilization." All right, then, people drew to our corner stand for apples, cider, and jokes, especially women. Okay, yeah, I admit death and sex draw a crowd too, but we only had remote connections with those lines of business. Our connection with mortality just amounted to the policy that if you stole an apple from us, you might meet the creator for it. Our connection with the sex business, although still rather remote, stood out a little more. For example, one night a car pulled up loaded with women who apparently had a very strong sexual nature. Okay, let's call them whores. A young one eyeballed me, pun intended, from the back window, while an older one asked me how to get to the Hellfire Club. Well, the Hellfire Club was a hardcore S&M sex club over on the west side around Greenwich Village. See, now here's the thing. Several hours later, they came back to us for apples. You see? While women didn't come to us for sex, they came to us after sex, after hard sex. Well, then, see, one of the women offered me a bite of an apple. Classic act. And I almost fell for it. Sex, apples, and women share extensive history, as you may know. And in the late 1970s, our apple stand intimately tied in with that history. Now, here's how. The history of the name, the nickname, the city's nickname, Big Apple, fits in here. See, in about 1806, Mademoiselle Evelyn Claudine, a member of French aristocracy, opened and operated an exclusive and elegant sex house on Bond Street near downtown Broadway. Evelyn's society of gentlemen clientele called her Eve, and they called her luscious girls Eve's Apples. Through time, the association of New York City, sex, and the apple idea evolved into the city's nickname. And rightly so, because up until recent years, New York City held the secretly coveted reputation for offering more sexual services per capita than did any other North American populace. New York City is the new world's rightful home of the sex, apples, and women connection. And our apple stand arose in that kind of spirit, in Eve's old neighborhood. Our stand captured that spirit and stood for it, in a sense. And somewhere in their souls, our customers knew that. If they ever forgot, our neon apple with a bite out of it sign reminded them. Now, we didn't have the wimpy Washington State apples that cluttered U.S. supermarkets back then. We had hearty upstate New York apples, non-waxed and non-sprayed. These superior apples got shipped exclusively to Europe, but we knew the growers, and we drove north and bought from them ourselves. We sold Wine Sap, Delicious, Black Twig, McCowan, Northern Spy, Cortland, Empire, and other kinds of apples. Tourists bought our Empires as edible Big Apple souvenirs, upon my suggestion to do so. Now, the same with our cider. We didn't get the standard murk made out of bad apples and floor scrapings. We made our own cider, but even when we didn't, we still selected perfectly good eating apples for pressing. Sometimes we had strictly red delicious cider, and sometimes we had combination cider like red and golden delicious mixed. We introduced the city to pear cider. Yep, we did. We pressed apples and pears together and sold that too. Nobody said the word pasteurized in our presence. If anybody even asked whether our cider was pasteurized, there is a good chance we swore at them about it. Our cider, you see, it was the real thing. Straight up raw cider so flavorful and smooth that you couldn't stop drinking it. It unclogged constipation that you didn't even know you had. Now, of course, we always kept a supply of cider that we, so to speak, forgot to sell in time. Old cider gives the best drinking high. We shared it with regular customers. So, we were the apple guys. We were the Big Apple guys. And when I say we, I mean Bob, the stand's owner, and I, although there was another main guy named Paul who worked there. I showed up for work every day, but not for the pay. Bob Stone, you see, the owner, he was among the most lying, cheating, cheap bastards I have ever met in my life. He paid me $6 an hour to stand in the freezing cold until 2 o'clock in the morning selling the best apples and cider in New York City. And he explained how that the privilege, mind you, of selling the best ones in the city made up for the pay. But that was Bob being a jackass. I dealt with junkies, gypsies, low-class Indians, and old people, all who stole money and fruit. I argued away a gun pointed at me in a robbery attempt. I plumped the pickings and kept the humor going on one of the most popular street corners in the city at that time, at 2nd Avenue and 6th Street. All right, wait, hang on. I did go to work every day for the pay. Yes, I did, but in an odd way. Bob often didn't have enough money to pay me on Fridays, but I knew how much money he had because I made a lot of it for him. Panther, settle down back there. If you've been watching many videos on my channel, you know that my cat Panther likes to knock things around. Hi, Panther. Pardon me while I pay attention to my cat. All right. That having been done, see, I knew how much money Bob had because I made a lot of it for him. He had a wad of unmanaged money. I had to go back Saturday and then Sunday or Monday just to get paid. And when it finally would happen, we had to at first work out when I last got paid and how much it was and what it was for, and then compare all that with what we each thought might now be due. And after working through the mathematical calculations between customers, which would take a day in itself, Bob wouldn't have enough money again. I'd get whatever I got, and now I had to keep track of the date again and the new balance due and what it was for. Now, this tedious cycle never ended. Every day I went to work, pissed off and planning to quit. But Bob would ease me into getting started, as he called it, sprucing up the apples, while we talked, and then we would start doing the calculations between customers, and he would tell me, then he would end up telling me he'd pay me later in the day. He would cap off the conversation now, mind you, with the solemn promise to give me a raise next week. Oh, yeah. So there I would be again at work another day. See what I mean about this all boiled down to a weird and tiring way of having to go to work to get paid? Yeah? Bob always said that if you want people to do things for you, you have to owe them money. Well, like I said, Bob was a jackass in that way. But he was worth being around no matter what. And working at the Apple stand, it really was a great thing to do. Oh, yeah. Bob was a good guy no matter what. Funny and genuine, in fact, with his robust voice and his genius humor and his rugged appearance, his attitude and charisma. The combination made him a running program of controlled abandon, bone-hard seriousness, and all balls-out, anus-clenching hilarity. Wherever Bob was, there was bold character and there was bold fun. No doubt about it. At any time, he could spontaneously say something that would make anybody laugh uncontrollably and stumble away paralyzed. He judged his jokes by how far laughing made customers spit out their cider, or by whether cider shot out their noses while they were drinking it. One time, some guys came around to kill Bob because he owed them money for just a little too long. He made them laugh uncontrollably until they left. We had the best apples, the best cider, and the best jokes in town. Now, gypsies lived down our block on 6th Street. They ran two apparently connected businesses, fortune telling, and a poker game. Now, occasionally, they bought an apple or two, but they always tried to buy the two for the price of the one. One day, we also had organic vine-ripened tomatoes, and these tomatoes looked luscious. In fact, they looked like they had sex appeal. They did. They had sex appeal. Now, one of these gypsy men stole a whole box. Oh, excuse me. Yikes. Excuse me. One of the gypsy men down the street, stole a whole box of our tomatoes and took it down the street to the back of his car. Then he left his car door unlocked and walked into a building. He must have felt untouchable. Well, Bob went for the kill. He got a bag of badly reeking fish from a Chinese restaurant across the street and transferred its contents into one of our empty tomato boxes. Then he switched the fish-filled tomato box with the stolen box of tomatoes in the gypsy's cart. Later on, our gypsy came out of the fortune teller's door with another gypsy. They stood on the sidewalk with their profusions of chest hairs and gold chains spilling out of their unbuttoned white business shirts, discussing important gypsy matters, I suppose. Soon our man reached toward his car, still talking. He opened the door and took out the box. Then he stopped talking and opened the box. And then he stuck his head down into his car. Suddenly he peered up the sidewalk with a sour expression. We waved like good neighbors. Thou shalt not steal. I'd gamble that the fortune teller didn't see that one coming. Another day, it was, as might be said, nipple stiffening cold out. People wore heavy coats, so we had to keep out a special eye for thieves. This time we sold cantaloupes in addition to our signature repertoire. A small line of customers waited while I weighed and priced the first one's apples. And just then, shambling along, came the worn-out 6th Street gypsy grandmother herself, the gypsy matriarch. She had on her old coat, and her old scarf, and her old shoes, and everything else that's old. She hobbled by almost unnoticed, but I caught on to what she'd done. With her back toward me, she'd brushed against the cantaloupes, and as she brushed against them, she'd snatched one and stuck it into her coat. Predictable. Oh, this time I went for the kill. I didn't chase her, no, because if I did, then more people would just steal fruit behind my back. I yelled down the sidewalk, but she kept going. I yelled for her again. She was getting a good distance away. I yelled a third time. Yo, old lady, bring it back or I'll hit you on the head with another one. But she still kept hobbling along. So I picked out a rotted cantaloupe from our garbage. I aimed and I lobbed the thing over people's heads. And we stood there watching as it sailed up, and then down, straight onto her old hat. Boink. Her noggin bobbed and the rotten cantaloupe exploded all over her. And she stopped. And then the cantaloupe dropped on the sidewalk from under her ratty coat and rolled into the gutter. And then she just went back to shambling along. Thou shalt not steal. So, folks, those were the good old days. Those were the good old days for the Lower East Side, for New York City, and for America. America had reached the high point in its social evolution by the end of the 70s. In no place did it show more evidently than in America's brain, New York City. Rugged individualism and bare-fisted free enterprise still thrived in New York's everyday life alongside organized team ventures. A human being could speak his mind without reproach and make a living with no resource but his own creativity. Technology boomed, but life did not depend upon it. People worked for each other without feeling alienated from themselves. The freedom of chaos and the structure of tradition operated side by side. Now, during the high point of any society, two characteristics stand out. One is an equal blend of all things that gave rise to that society and all things that will tear it back down. The other is an increase of noticeably synchronous events, no matter how juxtaposed, events that relate to one another in curious and often symbolic ways. And during the late 70s, New York epitomized both characteristics. Our Apple stand existed because the time was right for it. We arose from New York's spirit, and we stood for New York and all that New York meant. We stood for America, damn it. We stood for passion. We were one of those synchronous events that had happened. And people felt drawn to that. But soon the things that would tear society back down took over. And the high time faded. Along with it, the stand closed. No more apples. No more cider. The spirit was gone. So was the humor. And the neon apple sign never burned again. I visited the city lately. And I stood on our old corner. Rich, snobby people live around there now. They wouldn't have the guts to act American in the old sense of the word if their lives depended on it. If one of them stole something and I hit her on the head with a melon, she'd probably run for the cops and I'd get arrested. That's un-American behavior, through and through. Back then, cops laughed at anybody who ran to them with something like that. But today, the whole place is so-called cleaned up. It's petty, it's trendy, and proper. It feels barren, mechanical, and controlled. None of the old feeling exists. I stood where the Apple stand had stood. I could almost see the old customers. I could almost hear them laughing. I could almost smell the women and taste the apples. But only almost. They belong to a ghost town, a shadow of the past. Everything is different now. New York City is different. America is different. Whoever gave the proverbial apple a new shine, they let the core rot. The empire has fallen.